I'm here with Josh Jensen from Calera Vineyards. Thank you very much for joining us in Minnesota on this fairly warm day.
My pleasure.
My first question, I guess, is a little bit about your background. How do you end up making what many would claim are the greatest Pinot Noirs in California?
Well, first winery I ever really went into was the DRC in Burgundy, where I knocked on the door and asked if I could pick grapes there in 1970. And so maybe I got off to a good start that way.
Absolutely.
I had looked at and considered lots of other career paths. All my friends were in law school, medical school, business school, were working as bankers or stockbrokers or teachers or all, the usual suspects. But I wasn't really drawn to any of those jobs, and so at the same time I said, well, what am I really interested in? And I was completely crazy about wines at that time. I had been living in Europe for a couple of years and had become particularly interested in white Burgundies and red Burgundies. So I went to there and picked grapes to see if I liked the job, and found that I did, and eventually went back to California and started to try to start a winery.
So one of the stories, I guess one of the sort of the great stories about Calera is this sort of mythic journey of trying to find the perfect place to build your winery and to grow your fruit. Mm-hmm. And you selected Mount Harlan. Would you talk a little bit about that?
What I was looking for, because it was what my mentors, the great winemakers in Burgundy, said was the key ingredient in making their wine so special was limestone. Burgundy, the Côte d'Or, is basically a 30-mile long limestone ridge. Mm-hmm. And the limestone outcrops at the top of the ridge, but then it's the eroded flanks, the eastern flanks, which is where all the famous vineyards are planted, the greatest vineyards. It's covered with dirt that's sort of eroded down the hill from over the years. And so they said that's what makes their wines so complex, so subtle, mm-hmm. and so age-worthy. It's also soils derived from limestone are also very low yielding, okay. And we have certainly found that to be the case in our vineyards on Mount Harlan. But so when I returned to California, I started looking for limestone and was quite shocked to find out that there's very little of it in the state. Right. Like the two most famous counties in California for wine, Napa and Sonoma, have zero right. mapped mineral deposits of limestone. So using mineral geologic maps published by the State Bureau of Mines, I started looking and eventually found this, after a more than 2-year search, eventually found this 300-acre property way up in these remote, isolated mountains called the Gavilan Mountains, right. Not too far from Monterey, 25 miles inland from Monterey, but high up in the mountains, and there was this cone-shaped deposit of pure white crystal and limestone. And what we have done in the years since then is to plant on the flanks, going all the way around the mountain, to plant almost 84 acres of vineyards now.
So what is it about, you talked about limestone giving the wines of Burgundy traditionally, some of their ageability. Do you have a sense for what it is about limestone? You talk about low yields, but...
Well, low yields is a key,
okay.
And then I think the traditional Burgundian winemaking is also a key to longevity. We do not filter our Pinot Noirs. Sure. We filter our Chardonnays and our other white variety, Viognier, slightly. But we never filter the Pinots, and I think that's important. Low-yielding vines make wines that are more concentrated and intense, and they sort of have more stuffing and backbone, and I think that helps them age. But I think that the limestone just really provides a sense of complexity. The greatest wines in the world are the most complex wines. They're not the ones with the biggest, boldest flavors, but they're the ones that have, instead of just having one primary flavor of like grapes or grape juice, you know, fermented grape juice, they will have exotic and complex aromas and flavors where you taste a whole profusion of fascinating elements.
Right.
And that's really what somehow, and I'm not a geologist and I'm not a scientist, somehow that's what the limestone imparts to these grapes that are grown on that soil.
Sure. Well, and to your, to the specific, terroir
Mm-hmm.
of Mount Harlan, you're also growing. I don't know if they're the highest vineyard, but certainly among the higher vineyards in
Yes.
California.
Yes.
How does altitude affect what you do?
In our part of California, our closest town is Hollister, and a lot of people who've never been to Hollister think that it's a hot place, but it's not, because we're pretty close to the freezing cold Pacific Ocean, and we're on the path of the winds that come in off the cold, cooling winds that come in off the ocean. But I think that elevation is definitely a factor. It's cooler up there than it is down below. Where we make our wines is on a completely separate property. It takes about a half an hour to drive from the vineyards, 2,200 feet above sea level, down to the winery at 1,200 feet above sea level. So I think it's you get a cooling effect from being up there, and you get more peace and quiet and less pollutants maybe in the air. But
Sure.
But it's all those elements and factors: temperature, rainfall, exposure, deep soil, deep ground at 30, 40 feet down. It's just most of our vine's roots are probably down that far now, and so they're drawing mineral inputs from all this this big square of earth going straight down for 40, maybe even 50 feet.
Right. All limestone.
Yes.
Because you brought up the winery.
Yes.
And I know the winery is set up in a gravity feed
Yes.
model.
Yeah.
Would you talk a little bit about the premise behind that, or why
Well,
you're
the
enthusiastic
premise
about it?
behind it, many winemakers are attracted to the idea of the quietness, the simplicity, the gentleness of transferring wines from one phase in the operation to the next, just by letting it flow downhill through modern wine hoses or stainless steel must lines. So I found this 5-level abandoned rock crushing plant that we have turned into our winery. It was built in the 1950s, 4 parallel retaining walls, all 100 feet long. The highest wall was 29 feet high, but we cut off the top part of that wall, so it's 21 feet high now. And so with us, it's the same system. The grape trucks arrive at the top, we drop the grapes down into the fermentation tank, drop down into the press, down to the storage tank, down to the barrels. And we have made wine, and we can make wine there without ever pumping it, but typically we pump it each batch one time only. So at other wineries, every wine has maybe been pumped 6 different times, and it's before it's bottled.
Right.
But we pump it just one time, and that's from barrels, where it spends almost its whole time in its aging prior to bottling, back up 2 levels to a larger tank where we can consolidate that batch.
Right.
We fine it with the Pinots with egg whites, and the Chardonnay and Viognier with bentonite in those tanks, and then by gravity it goes down to the bottling tank, and the bottling tank is slightly higher than the bottling line, so it goes by gravity from the bottling tank into the filler. So it's a very gentle, non-interventionist, non-machine-oriented way to make wines.
Well, if you spend all that time finding the right spot and growing the right grapes, you don't want to screw it up by overhandling it.
Exactly.
Josh, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.